Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you for all your leadership and your commitment to commercial space. I'd especially like to thank you for a clarification that a launch license and an experimental permit can be issued for the same design, which will go a long way toward encouraging the continued growth of the commercial space industry. My amendment addresses an issue that will become more prevalent as this industry continues to expand and diversify. Specifically, space support vehicles, by which I mean experimental aircraft, such as hybrid launch systems, and test vehicles or training vehicles. I want to give some examples. When it comes to my state of Oklahoma, we have a spaceport. That spaceport is well suited for horizontal launch capabilities, which means a carrier aircraft will be required. As it stands right now, a carrier aircraft for a launch vehicle ultimately comes under two regulatory regimes. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see the process streamlined so that that carrier aircraft with a launch license or an experimental permit, that single carrier aircraft can have their process streamlined. So you can fly that carrier aircraft without having to go through multiple different jurisdictions at the FAA to get that carrier aircraft permitted. Additionally, when you think about other areas that are important to the state of Oklahoma, there's going to be training requirements for commercial crew, commercial astronauts, for commercial spaceflight participants. For this, we need training. One of the challenges we have is a lot of the training requirements. If you think about a T-38, that's what NASA uses to train their astronauts. You do high G maneuvers. You stay proficient by using a T-38. Well, as it relates to T-38s in the commercial sphere, that's an experimental aircraft. And the commercial industry is not allowed to hire experimental aircraft, whether it's for transportation of cargo or for training astronauts. So we need to streamline, I think, some of the processes by which permits and licenses are approved. Last year, Minority Leader McCarthy, who is the sponsor of the bill we are currently considering, and our Science Committee colleague, Mr. Posey, sent a letter to the FAA requesting draft language, quote, to permit the safe use of experimental aircraft in support of U.S. commercial spaceflight activities. I ask unanimous consent to place the FAA's response in draft language into the record.
Without objection.
Originally, I'd hoped the language would be included in the underlying bill, but it has become apparent that there are some industry stakeholders and some members of this panel, as well as the FAA, that have concerns that the proposal might cause more problems than it solves, particularly when it comes to providing adequate levels of safety. I appreciate my colleagues' concerns, but it is important we address this issue while the committee has the opportunity. I believe there's an emerging testing and training industry statutorily restricted, and a whole class of vehicles and aircraft that are in regulatory limbo, especially as it relates to training of commercial crew, commercial astronauts, and commercial spaceflight participants. This is why my amendment requires a GAO report. I want to be clear, it's just a GAO report that will capture the role of space support vehicles in the commercial space industry, especially as it relates to regulatory and statutory barriers to the services these vehicles offer, and recommendations for updates that will address these barriers. Mr. Chairman, I wish I could go further at this time toward clarifying the role these vehicles will have as the commercial space industry continues to rapidly expand. However, this amendment is an important first step, just a simple GAO report, one which will give us on this committee and those at the FAA information we need to enact new laws or promulgate smart regulations that accurately capture the state of the industry. Mr. Chairman, I hope we can continue to work together on this issue, and that once we receive this report, we can quickly hold hearings and try to pass laws on the recommendations that it lays out. This is critically important to the industry that we address this issue proactively. With that, I urge support for my amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bridenstine.